many people in here have heard of the term yes and? Comes from the world of comedy. Well, I'm here to kind of knock it on its head and introduce the term and yes to everyone here tonight. As you know, the term yes and comes from comedy, and it's an improvisational method to get people to react to something from another participant. And yes is really what our subconscious is telling us, that you have not recognized fear yet, so go ahead and just go for it. Fear cripples us and makes us not take chances in our careers, in our personal lives, and it makes us say no to things that when presented with an amazing opportunity, while you really want to do it, you'll end up saying no, it'll be less stressful if I don't do this, I won't make a fool of myself. So I'll be a little bit vulnerable here right now. One of my biggest fears is not being able to say everything that I wanted to say in tonight's presentation. So to get around that fear, my and yes is index cards. And I promise I will not constantly look down. It's just a little bit of a safety net. Anything to help you get around your fear. I've been witness to so many recently undergrad students, those in leadership roles at all positions that I've been in at different companies. Everyone is just so afraid of failure that they don't get out of their comfort zone, that they don't get the thrill of creating something new and creating something lasting and creating something that not only would benefit them, but for others in whatever industry you're in. I'm here to say that is clearly not a good thing to do. Don't ever fall back on the saying that I'm sure all of us in this room have heard is, well, that's always how it's been done. That is the surefire way to kill creativity, to kill excitement, and to kill anything that can benefit the future in whatever regard you're looking at. Many will say, well, what if I fail? That happens to all of us. Well, what if you fail? Chances are you'll still be alive, you'll be okay, unless you're doing something ridiculously crazy that you probably shouldn't be doing in the first place. And for me, knowing if I passed up an opportunity because of fear, the what if is probably what will end up in the long run killing me. That is the worst feeling to have. That what if I did this? Where could I be now? So I'll take you back down the road of the start of my career. Actually, it was in this room in 1996, as I date myself, where I was a telecommunications major here at Ball State, and I was in this studio as a TCOM production option. Loved it. And it was everything that I did in this studio and in a little part of this building now that got me to where I was with my career. I remember when I graduated, there was a certain group of us, and they were the ones that you knew they were going to get up, they're going to graduate, they're going to get out of Indiana, and they are just going to go, take over the industry. And then there were the others that while they were involved in the major, they liked it, they were too afraid to leave. So very quickly, my career, once I left Ball State and graduated, I worked at NBC Network, I worked for Warner Brothers TV, I worked for CBS Network, and then I worked for TV PR agencies in New York. I've had an amazing career that took me from LA to Chicago to New York to Vancouver, back to LA, and now, ironically, I'm working in the nonprofit world in Indiana. It's kind of funny how those circles kind of go a little loop-de-loo, but it did for me, and that's fine, and I loved it. Now, by just saying that, many would think, oh, your career was so easy, you got to travel everywhere, you got to move. There were a lot of failures along the way. Failure number one, before I even actually got out of the state of Indiana, I had to stay behind a year because I had to save up money so that when I got to LA, I would actually have a place to live and not live out of my car. To me, that was a failure because I was just ready to grab the diploma and then just run. So that was an internal or personal failure for myself, while many may not see that as one it was for me. Then 4 months before I left, my car lost its air conditioning. And a lot of was like, well, now you can't go. And I was like, that does not mean I can't go to LA. I will drive through the desert to get there. I'm going. And I did. Started at NBC. I was a page. Yes, for all the 30 Rock fans in here, we were the Kenneths of the West Coast. We were the much cooler pages. We were relaxed. We were like, take it easy, New York. We got this. We'll get this for you. And I loved it, and it was great. And when I was in that role as a page, I was there for about 3 months, and I was given the opportunity to interview for, at the time, they call them assignments. It was basically a real-life position within NBC somewhere in an actual department where you weren't a page in uniform, you were an actual employee. And I remember I had just started and they said, you never get your first assignment when you interview. If you've been there 3 months, they think that's too early, they probably won't let you interview. Well, I was afraid. I was like, well, if I ask, will they let me do it? I don't want to seem like I don't really want to be a page. And just something from that moment on clicked in my head. I was like, you know what? What do I got to lose? I faced fear head on, and I went and I interviewed for that position in the PR department in their syndicated division at the time. And I got it. And literally by taking that one chance, by looking at this random flyer on the wall in the page lounge about an assignment that was coming up, changed the course of my career. I was then an actual full-fledged NBC employee, and I worked on some of the greatest shows of the early 2000s for the network. And while I was there, I always feel that you should learn. What's scary? I'm too comfortable. What's the next thing that I can be afraid of? And I was like, do I like PR or do I like entertainment PR? So it was an opportunity for me in Chicago, so I moved to Chicago. Well, when I got there, I quickly learned that it was entertainment PR that I loved, not PR itself. And so while I had just moved there, maybe there about 6 months, I decided I can't do this anymore. And then by just being in the right place at the right time, having great contacts, and not being afraid to reach out and network with others, I discovered that there was a position open for Warner Brothers Television in Chicago, of all places. They had one show that was filming there, and I got the job. And it was great, and I loved it. Cut to around 2006, 2007, the writer's strike happened. And even though I wasn't on a scripted programming, Warner Brothers laid off 600 people. I was one of them. Some might see that as a failure. Well, you moved to Chicago, you didn't like the first job, then you got that one, you got laid off, time to pack it in. No, not necessarily. I again was ready for another challenge and to embrace another non-failure in my eyes. And while I was planning to go back to LA, New York came calling. So I ended up working at a TV PR agency. By this point, I learned that it's okay to work for a PR agency as long as they specialize in what it is that you love. And I had a great career there as well for a few years. So after the writer's strike happened in Chicago, got to New York, the dawn of social media happened. And everything that I did for my job and in my career up until that point completely changed. Was it scary? It was a very scary time. I still had that pressure of, I can't pack it in, I'm not giving up, what do I do with the rest of my life? And while I was on some shows that I enjoyed, there were others that I did not, and it was becoming clear that I could not stay with what I was doing at the rate that I was doing it on the type of programs that I was working on. And I wasn't in a company that was necessarily visionary at the time. Everyone was still afraid of social media. This was the point where you could not convince someone that an article on yahoo.com was much better get than to have a People magazine cover. So I saw the writing on the wall. I was like, it's time, I think, for me to move on. And because of that, I took that fear. I was just as much afraid as anything of changing again, and I went to film school. Something I never ever thought that I would ever say in my life, but I was open to new fears and hoping to get in, and everything that came with going out of the country and learning something in a place that you had never been before. You stepped foot into the classroom. And that's where I majored in entertainment business management. While I was there, social media kind of said, hey, it's not going anywhere. I realized that what I did as a publicist up until that point for about 10 years, I could take all of those skills and flip that and put it in towards social media. Only this time, I had somewhat control over the messaging and could say it in 140 words or less. So many would say, okay, well, that's a great story, but there were a lot of bumps along the way. Yeah, there were. But those bumps kept projecting me forward to the next best thing for myself. And I don't know about you guys, but when I tell other people, especially students who I'm encouraging to think outside the box, get out of Indiana, not that Indiana is a bad place, but you need to experience other areas so that you know what you're getting into for the rest of your life, because you may not know what you want to do yet, even though you think you do when you're in college, and you'll discover something that ends up being the greatest thing in your life. Afraid of failure. We're so afraid of failing that we don't say yes to amazing opportunities when they're presented to us. And I'm sure we can all see ourselves at least having moments like this, probably very recently, in these 3 images that are up there. I know that top right one, that's usually what I look like when I'm going, oh, do I interview for this job? Do I do this? I don't know. And you just take that fear and you move on. You probably don't remember the first time you started to walk. I mean, does anybody in here? No? Okay. Well, then you also probably don't remember that when you started to first walk, you failed. You fell probably every single time. And you know what happened? Eventually, you didn't fall, and you kept moving forward, and now look where you are now. So don't be afraid of failure. Failure is progression. We have to stop worrying about failure and worry about the missed opportunities when we don't try. Because if you would have stopped trying to walk after the first time you fell, your life probably would be a lot different than today. Fear and exhilaration go hand in hand. I know I live off of the thrill of having a fear and then the exhilaration that you get after it. Probably once I walk off of the stage, I'll sit down and just go, oh my God, what just happened? That was great. Remember that feeling when you have it, bottle it up inside and take it with you wherever you go. It's, in a word, exhilarating. Fear is also, too, an extreme common, but it's also how you react to it, too, that makes all the difference. Now, I want to give you guys a couple of stats here that, to me, I still can't wrap my mind around them. According to a survey by Linkagol, they found out that the fear of failure plagued 31% of respondents of this particular survey that they put out. 31% of the respondents were afraid of failure. That was larger than the 30% that feared spiders, which would have been myself, the 9% who were afraid of being home alone, and get this, the 15% who said that they were afraid of the paranormal. People are more afraid of failure than ghosts. Try to wrap your mind around that. So Jeff Buckley, he's an emotional intelligence analyst, and he talks a lot about fear and the 2 options that you have when faced with it. This is how some can view it. It's fear, it's emotions, it's all around you, and it can ruin you. But for you, you can make it be focused energy around you, and you gain respect. So, I'm sure we have all been in this position before. And if no one here has, I want to know your secret afterwards. Failure has everything to do with the movement and progression for those who advance their careers. Being in situations like this is mandatory. And you know what? Everything is fine. You might be sitting in the flames, eyes going crazy, saying, what did I just say yes to? But in the end, it will all be okay. I like to say that sometimes failure is actually you're failing forward because you're finding out, okay, that didn't work. Now I'll try the next thing. You're not staying in one place. And a lot of people may think that actually failing is automatically equated to, in our minds, of going backwards. But in reality, you're passing those things on that you either couldn't do, you weren't good at, or you kept propelling yourself forward. It's not a permanent position in life. Remember that. Failure is an occurrence. It happens and you move on. And I'm almost positive that many of us in here tonight have all had instances in their own personal and professional failures where you have experienced this and, you've said yes and then this happened. That's okay. Again, you're moving forward, you're progressing. You know what? We're all still here. Mostly all in one piece still. Mostly. I want to leave you tonight with just one of my all-time favorite quotes from a little entrepreneur that you may or may not have heard of before. Richard Branson had said, if someone offers you an amazing opportunity, but you're not sure you can do it, say yes, then learn how to do it later. That is a quote, a motto, however you want to look at it, that I live by. As soon as you start to feel comfortable and you start to think outside your box, say, well, what if I did this? And that fear starts to inch its way in and you're like, I don't know. stop what you're doing. You don't have to know everything. We all don't know everything. College grads, when you leave, I hate to tell you, you know nothing, even though you feel like you know everything. And then CEOs today, they don't know everything either. I'll put it to you this way. When I graduated from here in 2001, it was before the dawn and advent of social media, basically really anything digital. I know it's weird to think about a world before Netflix, but there actually was one. If somebody wasn't creative enough or had fear or was afraid of saying, you know what, let's start a mail delivery service of DVDs, I think people would like it. If no one ever took that chance, we wouldn't have Netflix today. We also wouldn't have streaming networks, social media. If somebody wasn't in a classroom or a dorm at Harvard saying, hey, what if we just did this internal thing where we can all talk to each other on these computers that are now seeming to pop up in every dorm room, we wouldn't have social media. We wouldn't have Facebook. We wouldn't have Twitter. We wouldn't have all these other things that we have now that are tools that we all use. Even though some of us don't want to admit that we use Facebook and Instagram and all of those, we do. They're a way of communicating. So take those chances. They didn't know how to create those platforms. They just sat there and tried it. They said yes, and they figured it all out later. Thank you.